Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption, From Different Seasons, by Stephen King. In different seasons, Stephen King has written 4 novellas, one for each season of the year. This one is subtitled, Hope Springs Eternal. And now, Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption.
There's a guy like me in every state and federal prison in America, I guess. I'm the guy who can get it for you. Tailor-made cigarettes, bag of reefer if you're partial to that, bottle of brandy to celebrate your son or daughter's high school graduation, or almost anything else. Within reason, that is. It wasn't always that way. I came to Shawshank when I was just 20, and I am one of the few people in our happy little family willing to own up to what they did. I committed murder. I put a large insurance policy on my wife, who was 3 years older than I was, and then I fixed the brakes of the Chevrolet coupe her father had given us as a wedding present. It worked out exactly as I had planned, except I hadn't planned on her stopping to pick up the neighbor woman and the neighbor woman's infant son on their way down Castle Hill and into town. The brakes let go, and the car crashed through the bushes at the edge of the town common, gathering speed. Bystanders said it must have been doing 50 or better when it hit the base of the Civil War statue and burst into flames. I also hadn't planned on getting caught, but caught I was. I got a season's pass into this place. Maine has no death penalty, but the district attorney saw to it that I was tried for all 3 deaths and given 3 life sentences to run one after the other. That fixed up any chance of parole I might have for a long, long time. The judge called what I had done a hideous, heinous crime. And it was, but it is also in the past now. You can look it up in the yellowing files of the Castle Rock Call, where the big headlines announcing my conviction look sort of funny and antique next to the news of Hitler and Mussolini and FDR's alphabet soup agencies. Have I rehabilitated myself, you ask? I don't even know what that word means, at least as far as prisons and corrections go. I think it's a politician's word. It may have some other meaning, and it may be that I will have a chance to find out, but that is the future, something cons teach themselves not to think about. I was young, good-looking, and from the poor side of town. I knocked up a pretty, sulky, headstrong girl who lived in one of the fine old houses on Carbine Street. Her father was agreeable to the marriage, if I would take a job in the optical company he owned and work my way up. I found out that what he really had in mind was keeping me in his house and under his thumb, like a disagreeable pet that has not quite been housebroken and which may bite. Enough hate eventually piled up to cause me to do what I did. Given a second chance, I would not do it again, but I'm not sure that means I am rehabilitated. Anyway, it's not me I want to tell you about. I want to tell you about a guy named Andy Dufresne, but before I can tell you about Andy, I have to explain a few other things about myself. It won't take long. As I said, I've been the guy who can get it for you here at Shawshank for damn near 40 years. And that doesn't just mean contraband items like extra cigarettes or booze, although those items always top the list. But I've gotten thousands of other items for men doing time here, some of them perfectly legal, yet hard to come by in a place where you've supposedly been brought to be punished. There was one fellow who was in for raping a little girl and exposing himself to dozens of others. I got him 3 pieces of pink Vermont marble, and he did 3 lovely sculptures out of them. A baby, a boy of about 12, and a bearded young man. He called them the 3 ages of Jesus. And those pieces of sculpture are now in the parlor of a man who used to be governor of this state. Or here's a name you may remember if you grew up north of Massachusetts, Robert Allen Coate. In 1951, he tried to rob the First Mercantile Bank of Mechanic Falls, and the holdup turned into a bloodbath. 6 dead in the end. 2 of them members of the gang, 3 of them hostages, 1 of them a young state cop who put his head up at the wrong time and got a bullet in the eye. Coate had a penny collection. Naturally, they weren't going to let him have it in here, but with a little help from his mother and a middleman who used to drive a laundry truck, I was able to get it for him. I told him, "Bobby, you must be crazy wanting to have a coin collection in a stone hotel full of thieves." He looked at me and smiled and said, "I know where to keep them. They'll be safe enough, don't you worry." And he was right. Bobby Coate died of a brain tumor in 1967, but that coin collection has never turned up. I've gotten men chocolates on Valentine's Day. I got 3 of those green milkshakes they serve at McDonald's around St. Paddy's Day for a crazy Irishman named O'Malley. I even arranged for a midnight showing of Deep Throat and The Devil in Miss Jones for a party of 20 men who had pooled their resources to rent the films. Although I ended up doing a week in solitary for that little escapade, it's the risk you run when you're the guy who can get it. I've gotten reference books and fuck books, joke novelties like hand buzzers and itching powder, and on more than one occasion I've seen that a long-timer has gotten a pair of panties from his wife or his girlfriend. And I guess you'll know what guys in here do with such items during the long nights, when time draws out like a blade. I don't get all those things gratis, and for some items the price comes high. But I don't do it just for the money. What good is money to me? I'm never going to own a Cadillac car or fly off to Jamaica for 2 weeks in February. I do it for the same reason that a good butcher will only sell you fresh meat. I got a reputation and I want to keep it. The only 2 things I refuse to handle are guns and heavy drugs. I won't help anyone kill himself or anyone else. I have enough killing on my mind to last me a lifetime. Yeah, I'm a regular Neiman Marcus. And so when Andy Dufresne came to me in 1949 and asked if I could smuggle Rita Hayworth into the prison for him, I said it would be no problem at all. And it wasn't. When Andy came to Shawshank in 1948, he was 30 years old. He was a short, neat little man with sandy hair and small, clever hands. He wore gold-rimmed spectacles. His fingernails were always clipped, and they were always clean. That's a funny thing to remember about a man, I suppose, but it seems to sum Andy up for me. He always looked as if he should have been wearing a tie. On the outside, he had been a vice president in the trust department of a large Portland bank. Good work for a man as young as he was, especially when you consider how conservative most banks are. And you have to multiply that conservatism by 10 when you get up into New England, where folks don't like to trust a man with their money unless he's bald, limping, and constantly plucking at his pants to get his truss round straight. Andy was in for murdering his wife and her lover. As I believe I have said, everyone in prison is an innocent man. Oh, they read that scripture the way those holy rollers on TV read the book of Revelation. They were the victims of judges with hearts of stone and balls to match, or incompetent lawyers, or police frame-ups, or bad luck. They read the scripture, but you can see a different scripture in their faces. Most cons are a low sort, no good to themselves or anyone else, and their worst luck was that their mothers carry them to term. In all my years at Shawshank, there have been less than 10 men whom I believed when they told me they were innocent. Andy Dufresne was one of them, although I only became convinced of his innocence over a period of years. If I had been on the jury that heard his case in Portland Superior Court over 6 stormy weeks in 1947 and 48, I would have voted to convict too. It was one hell of a case, all right, one of those juicy ones, with all the right elements. There was a beautiful girl with society connections, dead. A local sports figure, also dead. and a prominent young businessman in the dock. There was this, plus all the scandal the newspapers could hint at. The prosecution had an open and shut case. The trial only lasted as long as it did because the DA was planning to run for the U.S. House of Representatives, and he wanted John Q. Public to get a good long look at his phiz. It was a crackerjack legal circus, with spectators getting in line at 4 in the morning despite the sub-zero temperatures to assure themselves of a seat. The facts of the prosecution's case that Andy never contested were these: that he had a wife, Linda Collins Dufresne, that in June of 1947 she had expressed an interest in learning the game of golf at the Falmouth Hills Country Club, that she did indeed take lessons for 4 months, that her instructor was the Falmouth Hills golf pro Glenn Quentin, that in late August of 1947 Andy learned that Quentin and his wife had become lovers, that Andy and Linda Dufresne argued bitterly on the afternoon of September 10th, 1947, that the subject of their argument was her infidelity. He testified that Linda professed to be glad he knew. The sneaking around, she said, was distressing. She told Andy that she planned to obtain a Reno divorce. Andy told her he would see her in hell before he would see her in Reno. She went off to spend the night with Quentin in Quentin's rented bungalow not far from the golf course. The next morning, his cleaning woman found both of them dead in bed. Each had been shot 4 times. It was that last fact that militated more against Andy than any of the others. The DA, with the political aspirations, made a great deal of it in his opening statement and his closing summation. Andrew Dufresne, he said, was not a wronged husband seeking a hot-blooded revenge against his cheating wife. That, the DA said, could be understood if not condoned. But this revenge had been of a much colder type. Consider, the DA thundered at the jury, 4 and 4, not 6 shots, but 8. He had fired the gun empty, and then stopped to reload so he could shoot each of them again. 4 for him and 4 for her, the Portland Sun blared. The Boston Register dubbed him the Even Steven Killer. A clerk from the Wise pawn shop in Lewiston testified that he had sold a 6-shot .38 police special to Andrew Dufresne just 2 days before the double murder. A bartender from the country club testified that Andy had come in around 7 o'clock on the evening of September 10th, had tossed off 3 straight whiskeys in a 20-minute period. When he got up from the bar stool, he told the bartender that he was going up to Glenn Quentin's house, and he, the bartender, could read about the rest of it in the papers. Another clerk, this one from the handy-pick store a mile or so from Quentin's house, told the court that Dufresne had come in around 8:45 on that same night. He purchased cigarettes, 3 quarts of beer, and some dish towels. The county medical examiner testified that Quentin and the Dufresne woman had been killed between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. on the night of September 10th and 11th. The detective from the Attorney General's office who had been in charge of the case testified that there was a turnout less than 70 yards from the bungalow, and that on the afternoon of September 11th, 3 pieces of evidence had been removed from that turnout. First item, 2 empty quart bottles of Narragansett beer, with the defendant's fingerprints on them. Second item, 12 cigarette ends, all cool, the defendant's brand. Third item, a plaster moulage of a set of tire tracks exactly matching the tread and wear pattern of the tires on the defendant's 1947 Plymouth. In the living room of Quentin's bungalow, 4 dish towels had been found lying on the sofa. There were bullet holes through them and powder burns on them. The detective theorized, over the agonized objections of Andy's lawyer, that the murderer had wrapped the towels around the muzzle of the murder weapon to muffle the sound of the gunshots. Andy Dufresne took the stand in his own defense and told his story calmly, coolly, and dispassionately. He said he had begun to hear distressing rumors about his wife and Glenn Quentin as early as the last week in July. In late August he had become distressed enough to investigate a bit. On an evening when Linda was supposed to have gone shopping in Portland after her golf lesson, Andy had followed her and Quentin to Quentin's one-story rented house. Inevitably dubbed the Love Nest by the papers, he had parked in the turnout until Quentin drove her back to the country club where her car was parked about 3 hours later. "Do you mean to tell this court that you followed your wife in your brand-new Plymouth sedan?" the DA asked him on cross-examination. "I swapped cars for the evening with a friend," Andy said, and his cool admission of how well-planned his investigation had been did him no good at all in the eyes of the jury. After returning the friend's car and picking up his own, he had gone home. Linda had been in bed, reading a book. He asked her how her trip to Portland had been. She replied that it had been fun, but she hadn't seen anything she liked well enough to buy. "That's when I knew for sure," Andy told the breathless spectators. He spoke in the same calm, remote voice in which he delivered almost all of his testimony. "What was your frame of mind in the 17 days between then and the night your wife was murdered?" Andy's lawyer asked him. "I was in great distress," Andy said calmly, coldly. Like a man reciting a shopping list, he said that he had considered suicide and had even gone so far as to purchase a gun in Lewiston on September 8th. His lawyer then invited him to tell the jury what had happened after his wife left to meet Glenn Quentin on the night of the murders, and he told them, and the impression he made was the worst possible. "I knew him for close to 30 years, and I can tell you he was the most self-possessed man I've ever known. What was right with him he'd only give you a little at a time. What was wrong with him he kept bottled up inside. If he ever had a dark night of the soul, as some writer or other has called it, you would never know. He was the type of man who, if he had decided to commit suicide, would do it without leaving a note, but not until his affairs had been put neatly in order. If he had cried on the witness stand, or if his voice had thickened and grown hesitant, even if he had started yelling at that Washington-bound district attorney, I don't believe he would have gotten the life sentence he wound up with. Even if he had of, he would have been out on parole by 1954, but he told his story like a recording machine, seeming to say to the jury, 'This is it. Take it or leave it.' They left it. He said he was drunk that night, that he'd been more or less drunk since August 24th, and that he was a man who didn't handle his liquor very well. Of course, that by itself would have been hard for any jury to swallow. They just couldn't see this coldly self-possessed young man in the neat double-breasted three-piece woolen suit ever falling down drunk over his wife's sleazy little affair with some small-town golf pro. I believed it because I had a chance to watch Andy that those 6 men and 6 women didn't have. Andy Dufresne took just 4 drinks a year, all the time I knew him. He would meet me in the exercise yard every year about a week before his birthday, and then again about 2 weeks before Christmas. On each occasion he would arrange for a bottle of Jack Daniels. He bought it the way most cons arrange to buy their stuff, the slaves' wages they pay in here, plus a little of his own. Up till 1965, what you got for your time was a dime an hour. In 65, they raised it all the way up to a quarter. My commission on liquor was and is 10%, and when you add on that surcharge to the price of a fine sippin' whiskey like the Black Jack, you get an idea of how many hours of Andy Dufresne's sweat in the prison laundry was going to buy his 4 drinks a year. On the morning of his birthday, September 20th, he would have himself a big knock, and then he'd have another that night after lights out. The following day he'd give the rest of the bottle back to me, and I would share it around. As for the other bottle, he dealt himself 1 drink Christmas night and another on New Year's Eve. Then that bottle would also come to me with instructions to pass it on. 4 drinks a year. And that is the behavior of a man who has been bitten hard by the bottle, hard enough to draw blood. He told the jury that on the night of the 10th he was so drunk he could only remember what had happened in little isolated snatches. He had gotten drunk that afternoon, I took on a double helping of Dutch courage, is how he put it, before taking on Linda. After she left to meet Quentin, he remembered deciding to confront them. On the way to Quentin's bungalow, he swung into the country club for a couple of quick ones. He could not, he said, remember telling the bartender he could read about the rest of it in the papers, or saying anything to him at all. He remembered buying beer and the handy pick, but not the dish towels. "Why would I want dish towels?" he asked, and one of the papers reported that 3 of the lady jurors shuddered. Later, much later, he speculated to me about the clerk who had testified on the subject of those dish towels, and I think it's worth jotting down what he said. Suppose that during their canvass for witnesses, Andy said one day in the exercise yard, they stumble on this fellow who sold me the beer that night. By then 3 days have gone by. The facts of the case have been broadsided in all the papers. Maybe they ganged up on the guy, 5 or 6 cops, plus the dick from the Attorney General's office, plus the DA's assistant. Memory is a pretty subjective thing, Red. They could have started out with, "Isn't it possible that he purchased 4 or 5 dish towels," and worked their way up from there. If enough people want you to remember something, that can be a pretty powerful persuader. I agreed that it could. "But there's one even more powerful," Andy went on in that musing way of his. "I think it's at least possible that he convinced himself. It was the limelight, reporters asking him questions, his picture in the papers, all topped, of course, by his star turn in court. I'm not saying that he deliberately falsified his story or perjured himself. I think it's possible that he could have passed a lie detector test with flying colors, or sworn on his mother's sacred name that I bought those dish towels. But still, memory is such a goddamn subjective thing. I know this much, even though my own lawyer thought I had to be lying about half my story. He never bought that business about the dish towels. It's crazy on the face of it. I was pig drunk, too drunk to have been thinking about muffling the gunshots. If I'd done it, I would have just let 'em rip." He went to the turnout and parked there. He drank beer and smoked cigarettes. He watched the lights downstairs in Quentin's place go out. He watched a single light go on upstairs, and 15 minutes later he watched that one go out. He said he could guess the rest. "Mr. Dufresne, did you then go up to Glenn Quentin's house and kill the 2 of them?" his lawyer thundered. "No, I did not," Andy answered. By midnight he said he was sobering up. He was also feeling the first signs of a bad hangover. He decided to go home and sleep it off and think about the whole thing in a more adult fashion the next day. At that time, as I drove home, I was beginning to think that the wisest course would be to simply let her go to Reno and get her divorce. "Thank you, Mr. Dufresne." The DA popped up. "You divorced her in the quickest way you could think of, didn't you? You divorced her with a .38 revolver wrapped in dish towels, didn't you?" "No, sir, I did not," Andy said calmly. "And then you shot her lover?" "No, sir." "You mean you shot Quentin first?" "I mean I didn't shoot either one of them. I drank 2 quarts of beer and smoked however many cigarettes the police found at the turnout. Then I drove home and went to bed." "You told the jury that between August 24th and September 10th you were feeling suicidal?" "Yes, sir." "Suicidal enough to buy a revolver?" "Yes." "Would it bother you overmuch, Mr. Dufresne, if I told you that you do not seem to me to be the suicidal type?" "No," said Andy, "but you don't impress me as being terribly sensitive, and I doubt very much that if I were feeling suicidal I would take my problem to you." There was a slight tense titter in the courtroom at this, but it won him no points with the jury. "Did you take your .38 with you on the night of September 10th? "No, as I've already testified." "Oh, yes," the DA smiled sarcastically. "You threw it into the river, didn't you? The Royal River, on the afternoon of September 9th? "Yes, sir." "One day before the murders?" "Yes, sir." "That's convenient, isn't it?" "It's neither convenient nor inconvenient, only the truth." "I believe you heard Lieutenant Mincher's testimony." Mincher had been in charge of the party which had dragged the stretch of the Royal near Pond Road Bridge, from which Andy had testified he had thrown the gun. The police had not found it. "Yes, sir, you know I heard it." "Then you heard him tell the court that they found no gun, although they dragged for 3 days. That was rather convenient, too, wasn't it?" "Convenience aside, it's a fact they didn't find the gun," Andy responded calmly. "But I should like to point out to both you and the jury that the Pond Road Bridge is very close to where the Royal River empties into the Bay of Yarmouth. The current is strong. The gun may have been carried out into the bay itself. And so no comparison can be made between the riflings on the bullets taken from the blood-stained corpses of your wife and Mr. Glenn Quentin and the riflings on the barrel of your gun. That's correct, isn't it, Mr. Dufresne?" "Yes." "That's also rather convenient, isn't it?" At that, according to the papers, Andy displayed one of the few slight emotional reactions he allowed himself during the entire 6-week period of the trial. A slight, bitter smile crossed his face. "Since I am innocent of this crime, sir, and since I am telling the truth about throwing my gun into the river the day before the crime took place, then it seems to me decidedly inconvenient that the gun was never found." The DA hammered at him for 2 days. He reread the handy-pick clerk's testimony about the dish towels to Andy. Andy repeated that he could not recall buying them, but admitted that he also couldn't remember not buying them. Was it true that Andy and Linda Dufresne had taken out a joint insurance policy in early 1947? Yes, that was true. And if acquitted, wasn't it true that Andy stood to gain $50,000 in benefits? True. And wasn't it true that he had gone up to Glenn Quentin's house with murder in his heart, and wasn't it also true that he had indeed committed murder twice over? No, it was not true. Then what did he think had happened, since there had been no signs of robbery? "I have no way of knowing that, sir," Andy said quietly. The case went to the jury at 1:00 p.m. on a snowy Wednesday afternoon. The 12 jurymen and women came back in at 3:30. The bailiff said they would have been back earlier, but they had held off in order to enjoy a nice chicken dinner from Bentley's restaurant at the county's expense. They found him guilty. And, brother, if Maine had the death penalty, he would have done the air dance before that spring's crocuses poked their heads out of the snow. The DA had asked him what he thought had happened, and Andy slipped the question. But he did have an idea, and I got it out of him late one evening in 1955. It had taken those 7 years for us to progress from nodding acquaintances to fairly close friends. But I never felt really close to Andy until 1960 or so, and I believe I was the only one who ever did get really close to him. Both being long-timers, we were in the same cell block from beginning to end, although I was halfway down the corridor from him. What do I think? He laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. I think there was a lot of bad luck floating around that night, more than could ever get together in the same short span of time again. I think it must have been some stranger just passing through, maybe someone who had a flat tire on that road after I went home, maybe a burglar, maybe a psychopath. He killed them, that's all, and I'm here. As simple as that. And he was condemned to spend the rest of his life in Shawshank, or the part of it that mattered. 5 years later he began to have parole hearings, and he was turned down just as regular as clockwork in spite of being a model prisoner. Getting a pass out of Shawshank when you've got murder stamped on your admittance slip is slow work, as slow as a river eroding a rock. 7 men sit on the board, 2 more than at most state prisons, and every one of those 7 has an ass as hard as the water drawn up from a mineral spring well. You can't buy those guys. You can't sweet-talk them. You can't cry for them. As far as the board in here is concerned, money don't talk, and nobody walks. There were other reasons in Andy's case as well, but they belong a little further along in my story. There was a trustee, name of Kendricks, who was into me for some pretty heavy money back in the 50s, and it was 4 years before he got it all paid off. Most of the interest he paid me was information. In my line of work, you're dead if you can't find ways of keeping your ear to the ground. This Kendricks, for instance, had access to records I was never going to see running a stamper down in the goddamn plate shop. Kendricks told me that the parole board vote was 7-0 against Andy Dufresne through 1957, 6-1 in 58, 7-0 again in 59, and 5-2 in 60. After that, I don't know, but I do know that 16 years later he was still in cell 14 of cell block 5. By then, 1975, he was 57. They probably would have gotten big-hearted and let him out around 1983. They give you life, and that's what they take, all of it that counts anyway. Maybe they set you loose some day, but... Well, listen, I knew this guy Sherwood Bolton, his name was, and he had this pigeon in his cell. From 1945 until 1953, when they let him out, he had that pigeon. He wasn't any Birdman of Alcatraz, he just had this pigeon, Jake, he called him. He set Jake free a day before he, Sherwood that is, was to walk, and Jake flew away just as pretty as you could want. But about a week after Sherwood Bolton left our happy little family, a friend of mine called me over to the west corner of the exercise yard where Sherwood used to hang out. A bird was lying there, like a very small pile of dirty bed linen. It looked starved. My friend said, "Isn't that Jake, Red?" It was. That pigeon was just as dead as a turd. I remember the first time Andy Dufresne got in touch with me for something. I remember it like it was yesterday. That wasn't the time he wanted Rita Hayworth, though. That came later. In the summer of 1948, he came around for something else. Most of my deals are done right there in the exercise yard, and that's where this one went down. Our yard is big, much bigger than most. It's a perfect square, 90 yards on a side. The north side is the outer wall with a guard tower at either end. The guards up there are armed with binoculars and riot guns. The main gate is in that north side. The truck loading bays are on the south side of the yard. There are 5 of them. Shawshank is a busy place during the work week. Deliveries in, deliveries out. We have the license plate factory and a big industrial laundry that does all the prison wet wash, plus that of Kittery Receiving Hospital and the Elliott Nursing Home. There's also a big automotive garage where mechanic inmates fix prison, state, and municipal vehicles. Not to mention the private cars of the screws, the administration offices, and on more than one occasion those of the parole board. The east side is a thick stone wall full of tiny slit windows. Cell block 5 is on the other side of that wall. The west side is administration and the infirmary. Shawshank has never been as overcrowded as most prisons, and back in 48 it was only filled to something like 2/3 capacity. But at any given time there might be 80 to 120 cons on the yard, playing toss with a football or baseball, shooting craps, jawing at each other, making deals. On Sunday the place was even more crowded. On Sunday the place would have looked like a country holiday, if there had been any women. It was on a Sunday that Andy first came to me. I had just finished talking to Elmore Armitage, a fellow who often came in handy to me, about a radio when Andy walked up. I knew who he was, of course. He had a reputation for being a snob and a cold fish. People were saying he was marked for trouble already. One of the people saying so was Boggs Diamond, a bad man to have on your case. Andy had no cellmate, and I'd heard that was just the way he wanted it, although people were already saying he thought his shit smelled sweeter than the ordinary. But I don't have to listen to rumors about a man when I can judge him for myself. "Hello," he said. "I'm Andy Dufresne." He offered his hand, and I shook it. He wasn't a man to waste time being social. He got right to the point. "I understand that you're a man who knows how to get things." I agreed that I was able to locate certain items from time to time. "How do you do that?" Andy asked. "Sometimes," I said, "things just seem to come into my hands. I can't explain it, unless it's because I'm Irish." He smiled a little at that. I wonder if you could get me a rock hammer. What would that be, and why would you want it? Andy looked surprised. Do you make motivations a part of your business? With words like those, I could understand how he had gotten a reputation for being the snobby sort, the kind of guy who likes to put on airs. But I sensed a tiny thread of humor in his question. I'll tell you, I said. If you wanted a toothbrush, I wouldn't ask questions. I'd just quote you a price, because a toothbrush, you see, is a non-lethal sort of an object. You have strong feelings about lethal objects? I do. An old friction-taped baseball flew toward us, and he turned cat-quick and picked it out of the air. It was a move Frank Malzoni would have been proud of. Andy flicked the ball back to where it had come from. Just a quick and easy-looking flick of the wrist, but that throw had some mustard on it just the same. I could see a lot of people were watching us with one eye as they went about their business. Probably the guards in the tower were watching, too. I won't gild the lily. There are cons that swing weight in any prison, maybe 4 or 5 in a small one, maybe 2 or 3 dozen in a big one. At Shawshank I was one of those with some weight, and what I thought of Andy Dufresne would have a lot to do with how his time went. He probably knew it, too, but he wasn't kowtowing or sucking up to me, and I respected him for that. Fair enough. I'll tell you what it is and why I want it. A rock hammer looks like a miniature pickaxe, about so long. He held his hands about a foot apart, and that's when I first noticed how neatly kept his nails were. It's got a small sharp pick on one end and a flat, blunt hammerhead on the other. I want it because I like rocks. Rocks, I said. Squat down here a minute, he said. I humored him. We hunkered down on our haunches like Indians. Andy took a handful of exercise-yard dirt and began to sift it between his neat hands, so it emerged in a fine cloud. Small pebbles were left over, 1 or 2 sparkly, the rest dull and plain. One of the dull ones was quartz, but it was only dull until you'd rubbed it clean. Then it had a nice, milky glow. Andy did the cleaning and then tossed it to me. I caught it and named it. Quartz, sure, he said. And look, mica, shale, silted granite. Here's a place of graded limestone from when they cut this place out of the side of the hill. He tossed them away and dusted his hands. I'm a rockhound. At least I was a rockhound in my old life. I'd like to be one again on a limited scale. Sunday expeditions in the exercise yard? I asked, standing up. It was a silly idea, and yet seeing that little piece of quartz had given my heart a funny tweak. I don't know exactly why, just an association with the outside world, I suppose. You didn't think of such things in terms of the yard. Quartz was something you picked out of a small, quick-running stream. Better to have Sunday expeditions here than no Sunday expeditions at all, he said. You could plant an item like that rock hammer in somebody's skull, I remarked. I have no enemies here, he said quietly. No? I smiled. Wait a while. If there's trouble, I can handle it without using a rock hammer. Maybe you want to try and escape, going under the wall, because if you do... He laughed politely. When I saw the rock hammer 3 weeks later, I understood why. You know, I said, if anyone sees you with it, they'll take it away. If they saw you with a spoon, they'd take it away. What are you going to do, just sit down here in the yard and start banging away? Oh, I believe I can do a lot better than that. I nodded. That part of it really wasn't my business anyway. A man engages my services to get him something. Whether he can keep it or not after I get it is his business. How much would an item like that go for? I asked. I was beginning to enjoy his quiet, low-key style. When you've spent 10 years in stir, as I had then, you get awfully tired of the bellowers and the braggarts and the loudmouths. Yes, I think it would be fair to say I liked Andy from the first. $8 in any rock and gem shop, he said. But I realized that in a business like yours, you work on a cost-plus basis. Cost plus 10% is my going rate, but I have to go up some on a dangerous item. For something like the gadget you're talking about, it takes a little more goose grease to get the wheels turning. Let's say $10. 10 it is. I looked at him, smiling a little. "Have you got $10? "I do," he said quietly. A long time after, I discovered that he had better than 500. He had brought it in with him. When they check you in at this hotel, one of the bellhops is obliged to bend you over and take a look up your works. But there are a lot of works, and, not to put too fine a point on it, a man who is really determined can get a fairly large item quite a ways up them, far enough to be out of sight, unless the bellhop you happen to draw is in the mood to pull on a rubber glove and go prospecting. "That's fine," I said. "You ought to know what I expect if you get caught with what I get you." "I suppose I should," he said, and I could tell by the slight change in his gray eyes that he knew exactly what I was going to say. It was a slight lightening, a gleam of his special ironic humor. "If you get caught, you'll say you found it. That's about the long and short of it. They'll put you in solitary for 3 or 4 weeks, plus, of course, you'll lose your toy, and you'll get a black mark on your record. If you give them my name, you and I will never do business again. Not for so much as a pair of shoelaces or a bag of bugler, and I'll send some fellows around to lump you up. I don't like violence, but you'll understand my position. I can't allow it to get around that I can't handle myself. That would surely finish me." "Yes, I suppose it would. I understand, and you don't need to worry." "I never worry," I said. "In a place like this, there's no percentage in it." He nodded and walked away. 3 days later he walked up beside me in the exercise yard during the laundry's morning break. He didn't speak or even look my way, but pressed a picture of the Honorable Alexander Hamilton into my hand as neatly as a good magician does a card trick. He was a man who adapted fast. I got him his rock hammer. I had it in my cell for one night, and it was just as he described it. It was no tool for escape. It would have taken a man about 600 years to tunnel under the wall using that rock hammer, I figured. But I still felt some misgivings. If you planted that pickaxe end in a man's head, he would surely never listen to Fibber McGee and Molly on the radio again. And Andy had already begun having trouble with the sisters. I hoped it wasn't them he was wanting the rock hammer for. In the end, I trusted my judgment. Early the next morning, 20 minutes before the wake-up horn went off, I slipped the rock hammer and a package of Camels to Ernie, the old trustee who swept the cell block 5 corridors until he was let free in 1956. He slipped it into his tunic without a word, and I didn't see the rock hammer again for 19 years, and by then it was damned near worn away to nothing. The following Sunday, Andy walked over to me in the exercise yard again. He was nothing to look at that day, I can tell you. His lower lip was swelled up so big it looked like a summer sausage. His right eye was swollen half shut, and there was an ugly washboard scrape across one cheek. He was having his troubles with the sisters, all right, but he never mentioned them. "Thanks for the tool," he said, and walked away. I watched him curiously. He walked a few steps, saw something in the dirt, bent over and picked it up. It was a small rock. Prison fatigues, except for those worn by mechanics when they're on the job, have no pockets. But there are ways to get around that. The little pebble disappeared up Andy's sleeve and didn't come down. I admired that, and I admired him. In spite of the problems he was having, he was going on with his life. There are thousands who don't, or won't, or can't. And plenty of them aren't in prison either. And I noticed that, although his face looked as if a twister had happened to it, his hands were still neat and clean, the nails well kept. I didn't see much of him over the next 6 months. Andy spent a lot of that time in solitary. A few words about the sisters. In a lot of pens they are known as Bull Queers or Jailhouse Susies. Just lately the term in fashion is Killer Queens. But in Shawshank they were always the sisters. I don't know why, but other than the name, I guess there was no difference. It comes as no surprise to most these days that there's a lot of buggery going on inside the walls, except to some of the new fish, maybe, who have the misfortune to be young, slim, good-looking, and unwary. But homosexuality, like straight sex, comes in 100 different shapes and forms. There are men who can't stand to be without sex of some kind and turn to another man to keep from going crazy. Usually what follows is an arrangement between two fundamentally heterosexual men, although I've sometimes wondered if they are quite as heterosexual as they thought they were going to be when they get back to their wives or their girlfriends. There are also men who get turned in prison. In the current parlance, they go gay or come out of the closet. Mostly, but not always, they play the female, and their favors are competed for fiercely. And then there are the sisters. They are to prison society what the rapist is to the society outside the walls. They're usually long-timers doing hard bullets for brutal crimes. Their prey is the young, the weak, and the inexperienced. Or, as in the case of Andy Dufresne, the weak-looking. Their hunting grounds are the showers, the cramped tunnel-like area way behind the industrial washers and the laundry, sometimes the infirmary. On more than one occasion, rape has occurred in the closet-sized projection booth behind the auditorium. Most often, what the sisters take by force they could have had for free if they wanted it that way. Those who have been turned always seem to have crushes on one sister or another, like teenage girls with their Sinatras, Presleys, or Redfords. But for the sisters, the joy has always been in taking it by force, and I guess it always will be. Because of his small size and fair good looks, and maybe also because of that very quality of self-possession I had admired, the sisters were after Andy from the day he walked in. If this was some kind of fairy story, I'd tell you that Andy fought the good fight until they left him alone. I wish I could say that, but I can't. Prison is no fairy tale world. The first time for him was in the shower less than 3 days after he joined our happy Shawshank family. Just a lot of slap and tickle that time, I understand. They like to size you up before they make their real move, like jackals finding out if the prey is as weak and hamstrung as it looks. Andy punched back and bloodied the lip of a big, hulking sister named Boggs Diamond. Gone these many years since, to who knows where. A guard broke it up before it could go any further, but Boggs promised to get him, and Boggs did. The second time was behind the washers in the laundry. A lot has gone on in that long, dusty, and narrow space over the years. The gods know about it and just let it be. It's dim and littered with bags of washing and bleaching compound, drums of hex-light catalyst as harmless as salt if your hands are dry, murderous as battery acid if they're wet. The guards don't like to go back there. There's no room to maneuver, and one of the first things they teach them when they come to work in a place like this is to never let the cons get you in a place where you can't back up. Boggs wasn't there that day, but Henley Backus, who had been washroom foreman down there since 1922, told me that 4 of his friends were, and he held them at bay for a while with a scoop of hex-light, threatening to throw it in their eyes if they came any closer. But he tripped, trying to back around one of the big Washek's forepockets. That was all it took. They were on him. I guess the phrase gang rape is one that doesn't change much from one generation to the next. That's what they did to him, those 4 sisters. They bent him over a gearbox, and one of them held a Phillips screwdriver to his temple while they gave him the business. It rips you up some, but not bad. Am I speaking from personal experience, you ask? I only wish I weren't. You bleed for a while. If you don't want some clown asking you if you just started your period, you wad up a bunch of toilet paper and keep it down the back of your underwear until it stops. The bleeding really is like menstrual flow. It keeps up for 2, maybe 3 days, a slow trickle. Then it stops. No harm done, unless they've done something even more unnatural to you. No physical harm done. But rape is rape. And eventually you have to look at your face in the mirror again and decide what to make of yourself. Andy went through that alone, the way he went through everything alone in those days. He must have come to the conclusion that others before him had come to, namely that there are only two ways to deal with the sisters: fight them and get taken, or just get taken. He decided to fight. When Boggs and two of his buddies came after him a week or so after the laundry incident, "I heard you got broke in," Boggs said, according to Ernie, who was around at the time. Andy slugged it out with them. He broke the nose of a fellow named Rooster McBride, a heavy-gutted farmer who was in for beating his stepdaughter to death. Rooster died in here, I'm happy to add. They took him, all three of them. When it was done, Rooster and the other egg, it might have been Pete Verness, but I'm not completely sure, forced Andy down to his knees. Boggs Diamond stepped in front of him. He had a pearl-handled razor in those days with the words "Diamond Pearl" engraved on both sides of the grip. He opened it and said, "I'm going to open my fly now, Mr. Man, and you're going to swallow what I give you to swallow. And when you done swallowed mine, you're going to swallow Rooster's. I guess you done broke his nose, and I think he ought to have something to pay for it." Andy said, "Anything of yours that you stick in my mouth, you're going to lose it." Boggs looked at Andy like he was crazy, Ernie said. "No," he told Andy, talking to him slowly like Andy was a stupid kid. "You didn't understand what I said. You do anything like that, and I'll put all 8 inches of this steel into your ear. Get it?" "I understood what you said. I don't think you understood me. I'm going to bite whatever you stick into my mouth. You can put that razor into my brain, I guess, but you should know that a sudden, serious brain injury causes the victim to simultaneously urinate, defecate, and bite down." He looked up at Boggs, smiling that little smile of his, old Ernie said, as if the three of them had been discussing stocks and bonds with him instead of throwing it to him just as hard as they could, just as if he was wearing one of his 3-piece banker's suits instead of kneeling on a dirty broom closet floor with his pants around his ankles and blood trickling down the insides of his thighs. "In fact," he went on, "I understand that the bite reflex is sometimes so strong that the victim's jaws have to be pried open with a crowbar or a jack-handle." Boggs didn't put anything in Andy's mouth that night in late February of 1948, and neither did Rooster McBride, and so far as I know, no one else ever did either. What the three of them did was to beat Andy within an inch of his life, and all 4 of them ended up doing a jolt in solitary. Andy and Rooster McBride went by way of the infirmary. How many times did that particular crew have at him? I don't know. I think Rooster lost his taste fairly early on. Being in nose splints for a month can do that to a fellow, and Boggs Diamond left off that summer all at once. That was a strange thing. Boggs was found in his cell, badly beaten one morning in early June when he didn't show up in the breakfast nose count. He wouldn't say who had done it or how they had gotten to him, but being in my business, I know that a screw can be bribed to do almost anything, except get a gun for an inmate. They didn't make big salaries then, and they don't now. And in those days there was no electronic locking system, no closed-circuit TV, no master switches which controlled whole areas of the prison. Back in 1948, each cell block had its own turnkey. A guard could have been bribed real easy to let someone, maybe 2 or 3 someones, into the block, and yes, even into Diamond's cell. Of course, a job like that would have cost a lot of money. Not by outside standards, no, prison economics are on a smaller scale. When you've been in here a while, a dollar bill in your hand looks like a 20 did outside. My guess is that if Boggs was done, it cost someone a serious piece of change. $15, we'll say, for the turnkey, and 2 or 3 apiece for each of the lump-up guys. I'm not saying it was Andy Dufresne, but I do know that he brought in $500 when he came, and he was a banker in the straight world, a man who understands better than the rest of us the ways in which money can become power. And I know this. After the beating, the 3 broken ribs, the hemorrhaged eye, the sprained back, and the dislocated hip, Boggs Diamond left Andy alone. In fact, after that he left everyone pretty much alone. He got to be like a high wind in the summertime, all bluster and no bite. You could say, in fact, that he turned into a weak sister. That was the end of Boggs Diamond, a man who might eventually have killed Andy if Andy hadn't taken steps to prevent it, if it was him who took the steps. But it wasn't the end of Andy's trouble with the sisters. There was a little hiatus, and then it began again, although not so hard or so often. Jackals like easy prey, and there were easier pickings around than Andy Dufresne. He always fought them. That's what I remember. He knew, I guess, that if you let them have at you even once without fighting, it got that much easier to let them have their way without fighting next time. So Andy would turn up with bruises on his face every once in a while. And there was the matter of the 2 broken fingers 6 or 8 months after Diamond's beating. Oh, yes, and sometime in late 1949 the man landed in the infirmary with a broken cheekbone that was probably the result of someone swinging a nice chunk of pipe with the business end wrapped in flannel. He always fought back, and as a result he did his time in solitary. But I don't think solitary was the hardship for Andy that it was for some men. He got along with himself. The sisters was something he adjusted himself to. And then, in 1950, it stopped almost completely. That is a part of my story that I'll get to in due time. In the fall of 1948, Andy met me one morning in the exercise yard and asked me if I could get him 6 rock blankets. "What the hell are those?" I asked. He told me that was just what rockhounds called them. They were polishing cloths about the size of dish towels. They were heavily padded with a smooth side and a rough side. The smooth side like fine-grained sandpaper, the rough side almost as abrasive as industrial steel wool. And he also kept a box of that in his cell, although he didn't get it from me. I imagine he kited it from the prison laundry. I told him I thought we could do business on those, and I ended up getting them from the very same rock and gem shop where I had arranged to get the rock hammer. This time I charged Andy my usual 10% and not a penny more. I didn't see anything lethal or even dangerous in a dozen 7-inch by 7-inch squares of padded cloth. Rock blankets, indeed. It was about 5 months later that Andy asked if I could get him Rita Hayworth. That conversation took place in the auditorium during a movie show. Nowadays we get the movie shows once or twice a week, but back then the shows were a monthly event. Usually the movies we got had a morally uplifting message to them, and this one, The Lost Weekend, was no different. The moral was that it's dangerous to drink. It was a moral we could take some comfort in. Andy maneuvered to get next to me, and about halfway through the show he leaned a little closer and asked if I could get him Rita Hayworth. I'll tell you the truth, it kind of tickled me. He was usually cool, calm, and collected, but that night he was jumpy as hell, almost embarrassed, as if he was asking me to get him a load of Trojans, or one of those sheepskin-lined gadgets that are supposed to enhance your solitary pleasure, as the magazines put it. He seemed overcharged, a man on the verge of blowing his radiator. "I can get her," I said. "No sweat, calm down. You want the big one or the little one?" At that time Rita was my best girl. A few years before it had been Betty Grable, and she came in 2 sizes. For $1 you could get the little Rita. For $2.50 you could have the big Rita, 4 feet high and all woman. "The big one," he said, not looking at me. I tell you, he was a hot sketch that night. He was blushing just like a kid trying to get into a cooch show with his big brother's draft card. "Can you do it?"